You can have everything and have nothing. But with Jesus, you can have nothing but have everything. You know, Jesus has better things to do than ruin your life, give you a bunch of rules that make no sense and have no purpose. He wants to give you a rich and satisfying life. And this has been verified by science. Jesus wants to be a blessing to you so you can be a blessing to others. Would you trust him to be your king? And this is my family here. If we see them on the screen, right there we go. This is my family sitting up here in the fourth row. My beautiful wife, Sarah, and then my oldest son, Clayton. Today's his last day of being a child. Tomorrow he turns 13. So make sure you make him feel nice and awkward. No, congratulate him. He's about to enter a new phase of life, and we're very proud of him and glad we have him in our family. We have Kodiak over here, who just turned 11 about a month ago. We have Christopher here. No matter how late he's up in the morning on time and recently started preparing breakfast at age 7. And a couple days ago, I woke up and I was like, wow, the table is set. Nice. So my chest hair kind of got a little curly here, and I was like, that's my boy. Right, Christopher? Yes, and there's my little princess, Kalea, and she loves giving Daddy hugs. And it's so nice that Daddy's finally the favorite, because I've been a second-class citizen with the other 3 boys. You know what that is? Yeah. But this is my family, and we love to travel, and in 2014, my brother became an atheist, and I've always loved science. I used to be a science major, and so I've always kind of had an interest in apologetics, the intellectual defense of the faith. And I've been going around Western Canada speaking about this. But when I got an invite, I would love to go there and travel. I take Christopher with me sometimes, but I'd have to leave my family behind. And so recently, in March this year, we sold our house, moved the entire family into this beast, 41-foot motor home. And September 1, we officially resigned at Church in the Valley, and now we are traveling around North America together as a family, teaching on apologetics. And my wife has a passion for prayer ministry. Then also my 22 years experience as a children's pastor. I also love doing practical workshops on how to work with young people, recruit volunteers, storytelling, etc. That's what we currently do. Our ministry is called Evidence for God. And today, Remembrance Day especially, we want to talk about an amazing story of not surrendering. An amazing story of not surrendering. Who here has a sibling, an older brother or sister in particular? You ever wrestle with them? Maybe a few times. And there's this added challenge. If you're the younger sibling, because you're outmatched in size and strength and usually coordination, right? Just based on the years of experience your older sibling has. And I remember wrestling with my brother, and he'd twist me around and headlock me and say, "Do you give up?" And his arm would be around my neck and be like, "Never!" And then he'd twist me around, grab my leg, pull it around my back so I look like a pretzel. My heel is touching my ear. And just a very uncomfortable situation. He'd bend me this way and that way and say, "Do you give up now? Do you surrender?" And I would say, "I will never surrender." And hopefully by then, Mom would hear me scream and come in and rescue me and get my older brother in trouble, right? There's something heroic about not giving up. Even though the other person is stronger, more powerful than you, you're outmatched. There's something heroic about never surrendering. In the classic 1970s movie Star Wars, right? I think it was The Empire Strikes Back. Darth Vader is a legendary Jedi turned Sith Lord, and he is fully trained on both sides of the Force. And Luke Skywalker skips his training with Yoda to go and rescue his friends, but so doing, he's not only younger, less experienced, he's not even properly trained. And so he's fighting against Darth Vader, right? Outmatched in every way, and finally gets pinned down, and Darth Vader's red lightsaber is going up towards his chest and throat. It is, "Join the dark side." Of course, Luke Skywalker says, "Never!" In an act of desperation, the hero throws himself down the shaft. There's something amazing about an underdog that refuses to surrender. Well, there are some conditions, though. When is it wise to surrender, and when is it unwise? When should we not surrender, and when should we surrender? Number one, evil Sith Lords should not be surrendered to because their authority is undeserved, right? They've taken over the empire through hook and by crook, and they do not deserve the authority they currently have or want to claim. Number two, they can't be trusted, right? So even if someone wins fair and square, then you're like, no, I can't trust you. Because when you give someone authority, you give them power. Will they use that power to help those under them, or will they use that power to benefit themselves at the expense of the people that they have authority over, right? Can we trust them with that authority? Right? Is it deserved? Can they be trusted? And of course, this leads to the third variable. Is it worth the fight? Even though Luke Skywalker could have died, right? He thought it was worth a fight. And this is what we remember today. These heroes who went into battle and they died. And sometimes they ran into battle, outmatched, outgunned, and they ran in there to fight the good fight. And it was worth the fight even at the cost of their lives. Well, there's a hero in history, a little different spelling, Hiro, Hiro Onoda. And this young man was stationed in World War II on the Philippine island of Lubang. All right, I want to make sure I got my notes here right. Yes, December 26th, the day after Christmas, 1944. He was assigned to Lubang Island in the Philippines. His mission was to hamper enemy attacks and under no circumstances to surrender. And so he was there for just a few months, 2 months to be exact. And on February 28, 1945, the Americans, with their mass production now fully engaged, right? An economy 10 times the size of Japan invaded this island, going from island to island, and they just overwhelmed the Japanese. So it doesn't matter how brave they fought, how strong they were, it was just overwhelming force from the ships and the airplane attacks to the landing craft, the cannons, the guns, just sheer manpower, overwhelming force. They just started to take over the entire island. Soon, all the Japanese soldiers either dead or they had surrendered, which was very shameful in Japanese culture. Well, before the final soldier surrendered, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi talked to Onoda and gave him his final orders. He told him to stand and fight. It may take 3 years, it may take 5 years, but whatever happens, we will come back for you. So Hiro Onoda and his 3 friends escaped to the jungle to wage guerrilla warfare, to do anything they could to slow down the Allies. Now, of course, they had no resources. The island had been taken over by the Allies, so they had to run in with pretty much nothing but a few weapons in their backpack. Well, pretty soon they got hungry. They run out of food. Well, you got to go and you got to fight the residents of the island and steal their food, which, of course, they don't like. So they're fighting back, right? When they went back to their little hut, made little bamboo huts, right? There's no proper windows or installations. Mosquitoes all night. Mosquitoes are messing with them. Whatever food they had, they not only had to steal it at risk of their life of being shot themselves, they had to steal it. When they brought it back, rats and other pests would steal their food or contaminate it, right? Walking through the jungle, right? You had the humidity, just brutal humidity there in the tropics. And of course, my least favorite thing with the tropics, poisonous snakes. Well camouflaged. So they were doing this for months, right? And whenever they had a chance, they'd go and they'd get back at the Americans. Again, their orders were under no circumstances to surrender. Well, does Jesus deserve to be surrendered to? Does he deserve to be your king? right? In Hebrews 11:3, we read, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command. So what was seen was not made out of what is visible, right? He created the universe, he created life, he created you. Does he deserve the authority he claims in your life? Number 2, can you trust him, right? Can you trust him to use his authority for your benefit? Or does he want authority over your life just to use his own power to benefit himself at your expense? Can you trust Jesus to be your king? Right? In Philippians chapter 2, it says, though he was God. So this is teaching that Jesus pre-existed the universe. Pre-existed the universe. Though he was God, he gave up his divine privileges. Right? From creator of the universe, he lowered himself to not only become a man. That's like you becoming an amoeba. Okay? In order to create the universe, you are unimaginably powerful. Right? To come down, condescend, become a human being, and then not just that, but die a criminal's death on a cross. It's like an electric chair. That's the slowest, most brutal way to kill the worst criminals, the most shameful way, most painful, slow, torturous way to die that the Roman Empire had perfected. So because of this, Philippians 2:6-10 says, therefore God elevated him, right, from the lowest position on the cross to the highest position of honor in heaven, that the name of Jesus every knee should bow. Or in today's terms, you would say surrender. That is an act of surrender. Every knee should bow to Christ. And there's a little side note. This is one of the oldest quotes about Jesus. This quote predates the Bible. This is Paul, the first author of the Bible, the first New Testament writer, and this is a quote that is within about 2 or 10 years of the life of Jesus. So you'll notice how right away the story of Jesus is supernatural, that he is the creator of the universe, he died for you, and because he died for you and resurrected, therefore he should be elevated to the highest honor, not only in heaven, but to the highest place of honor in our hearts. Well, should we surrender? Does Jesus deserve to be king? Can you trust him to be your king? Or number 3, is it worth fighting? Is it worth resisting God's call on your heart? Well, after 2 nuclear bombs were dropped on Japan, Japan decided it wasn't worth resisting the Americans. And in August of 1945, they surrender, a complete surrender to America. And of course, things weren't as bad as many of them had anticipated. America, instead of just destroying them, America helped them rebuild. America helped them set up a stronger democratic system, etc. And of course, today, I love Toyota cars, right? We buy Sony Discman and Walkmans and Hitachi this, right? And Panasonic that and Sanyo. Japan is now one of our closest allies. And in the end, they gave up. And they were not, instead of being destroyed, they were helped. They were built up. They were redeemed, as it were, right? Well, Hironoda didn't know this. They were still in the jungles fighting for several months. That was in August 15, World War II ended. And in October 1945, the good news was printed on paper and was dropped from the sky into the jungle. See, they had gone in there to try and get Hiro and his 3 buddies, and they couldn't get them. These guys were too sneaky. They hid too well. They couldn't flush them out. So they finally gave up that. They dropped down papers from the sky saying, hey, great news. The war ended on August 15. Come down from the mountains. No, well, our Bible, though it might be popular things, didn't quite drop from heaven. But we do believe the Bible is supernaturally inspired or supernaturally influenced by God, that God moved the prophets and historians who wrote the Bible to accurately record the story of Jesus and the story of God redeeming humanity. That good news hasn't quite dropped from heaven, but figuratively we could say it's come down to us and it's available to us to read, right? Will you believe the good news that has been provided to you? Well, Hiro Onoda and his buddies, they looked at it. There's 4 of them. There's Hiro and 3 of his friends. They looked over these pamphlets and no. The Americans, we're like a thorn in their side. They looked over like, we don't trust this. This is a fraud. This good news is fake. We don't trust it. We're to keep fighting, and under no circumstances will we surrender. Can you trust the good news? Right? Jesus clarified his purpose as a thief's purpose. That's the devil. The thief's purpose is steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give them, that's all of us, a rich and satisfying life. As we look at science, at the sociology of religion, some people claim that science and religion are in conflict. That's 99% false. There's a few areas of conflict, but overall, religion and science are extremely compatible. First of all, we use science to look at scripture. We use things like carbon dating to verify how old the Bible is. With the Dead Sea Scrolls, we prove that the book of Daniel, for example, is prophetic. It's not written after the events it predicts. It's written before the events it predicts. With the New Testament, the most verified document in history, nothing else is even close. We use science to date the New Testament, so it's so close to the time of Jesus that it's a miracle. That if you don't believe in Jesus, then the New Testament is a miracle how that book can come so fast after Jesus. And be verified by so many other historians, including hostile historians, verify many of the facts in the Bible. So through science, we can study that the story of Jesus is actually true, that he not only is a historical figure, but he actually came back from the dead, using the same crime scene investigation techniques police use in an old murder. You apply that to the story of Jesus, how you handle eyewitness accounts, the story's actually true. Number 2, it's a story worth dying for. All over the world, including now, people are not only dying for war, defending their country, they're also dying defending their faith. In fact, more people die today for the Christian faith than ever before in history. That's incredibly profound. Number 3, we find in Western societies, we study Christianity, the people who believe in Jesus and follow him, they regularly attend church, regularly worship God, they find that they are happier. They have lower rates of depression. Number 4, they have more love. They have lower rates of divorce. Number 5, they have a better love life. Right? Monogamy gives you the best love. When you study people, this whole just mess around with whoever you feel like, it does not give you the best love life. It's been studied. Good girls and good boys have the most satisfying and the highest frequency in their romantic lives. Okay? Again, through science, we find this. Christians on average are more educated. They have on average more years of education. And number 7, they live longer. People who regularly attend church live 4 to 10 years longer. Also make 9% on average more money. So the stereotype that Christians are ignorant, stupid people who die young because they're so unhealthy simply isn't true. It's categorically false. The Harvard School of Public Health calls religion the elixir of life. If you could put this in a pill, people would pay anything to have this pill in which you lived longer, 4 to 10 years longer, you made more money, you had a better love life, you had a better marriage, you had more happiness and lower depression. Well, not only that, but if Christianity is true, there's a blessing of eternal life. It's counterintuitive to give up your life, to surrender to Christ. You have a better life than just doing whatever you want? Yes, you do. You do have a better life. Well, Hiro Onoda was not having his best life. He could have been home with his family and friends eating the best food in the world. You were here last night, mango sushi. But there was no mango sushi on Lumen Island. Him and his 3 buddies kept fighting the Allies no matter what. And you know what? A little bit later, the Americans dropped off more flyers about a year later, leaflets printed on them, and this time they had an order from their general, Tomoyuki Yamashita. And Hiro and Onoda, they looked at this had orders from their superior. They looked over it, and they still didn't believe the evidence. They didn't believe the good news. They didn't trust it. They decided it was a fraud. Well, a little bit later, about 5 years later, in 1950, one of the 4 Japanese soldiers surrendered. He decided it wasn't worth the fight. He was tired of the jungle, the mosquito, the rats, tired of being shot at. Because again, you're stealing people's food. People don't like you stealing from them, right? He said, forget about this. I'm going to surrender. So he surrendered in 1950. And of course, what he discovered, he got on a plane, he went back to Japan, and Japan is booming, right? Japan is doing great, and he got to go back with his family, with his friends, being with his loved ones, and he discovered it wasn't worth the fight. Jesus, in Matthew 23:37, he said, how often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Now, I preached a sermon the first time in Church in the Valley, and there was a 70-year-old man in the audience who had been in church for decades. But listening to this message I'm sharing today, he said, wow. He realized, I've never actually surrendered to Christ. I've been here, I've been ticking off the dots, but I've never actually surrendered. And so he came up to me afterwards and he said, man, I finally gave my heart to Jesus. I want to do Bible studies and be baptized. I looked at him like, great. I'm a kids pastor. So I normally of course, I baptize young people and teenagers, right? And so it's the only time I baptized a senior citizen. It was an amazing privilege. I want to ask you a question here today. How much evidence is enough? Right? When you go to court, we have to decide if someone's innocent or guilty, not beyond possible doubt, but beyond reasonable doubt. And it's amazing. People can have the exact same evidence come to opposite conclusions. In this story, there's these 2 revolutionaries. They weren't thieves. You don't crucify thieves. You crucify terrorists. Okay, so these are revolutionaries who were using violence to try and get rid of the Romans. They had likely killed Roman soldiers, and so they're being tortured to death in the slowest, most brutal way possible as an example. Don't mess with Rome. They're both making fun of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. And somewhere along the way, these revolutionaries who are giving their life for an earthly Messiah, they want a Messiah to kick out the Roman oppressors. Jesus is dying next to him. He claims to be the Messiah. So their questions are not answered. This is not the Messiah they expect. But one of the thieves changes from mocking Jesus to accepting him. And look at this quote. He says, Lord, first of all, he calls him Lord. This guy's being tortured like a criminal. It says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. So first of all, he's calling him God, right? Because the saying was Caesar is Lord, Caesar is God. He's calling him God. He's calling him a king. And he's about to die. He's having the faith to say, if I ask you, maybe you'll remember me because your kingdom is still coming. I don't know how. This doesn't make any sense to me, but I've seen enough evidence that this guy is different. He's a king from heaven somehow. It doesn't make sense to me, but somehow I've seen too much evidence to deny. It says, Lord, remember me in your kingdom. And of course, Jesus replies, claiming that authority, that divine authority, you will be with me in paradise. How much evidence is enough? When my brother became an atheist, I went back and I double-checked my faith. My faith based on fairy tales, or is Christianity supported by logic and evidence? And this is what the strongest evidence. We're just going to do a quick overview here. Each one of these deserves its own sermon. But number one, the universe has a beginning. Nothing comes from nothing. There is something. If there is no God, there should be nothing. The universe has a beginning. That's literally huge. Number two, the universe is extremely precisely fine-tuned for life, like with hundreds of zeros behind it. By the way, a billion is a lot, that's 9 zeros. Hundreds of zeros behind the fine-tuning of the universe. Number three, life has a beginning. That's massive. Just the DNA, the simplest DNA to the simplest bacteria, where scientists cut the DNA out until the bacteria died. The minimum recipe for life is 170 characters long. You try and hack a password that's 12 characters long. Not 12, 170,000 characters has to come by random chance. That's never going to happen. A billion years is nothing. A billion years is 9 zeros. The simplest DNA bacteria is 230,000 zeros. 21 times 21, 170,000 times. Number four, there are modern verified miracles all the time. People are being healed without explanation. Now the thing is, not everyone is healed. As a pastor, I've anointed people who later died with cancer. But I also know, I talked about him last night, Randy over at Church in the Valley runs our sound system up there occasionally. That guy's supposed to be dead 20 years ago. The doctors told him to put his affairs in order. We prayed, same church, same pastors. We prayed and anointed him, and he's still alive now, enjoying his grandkids. Amen? So we have modern verified miracles, verified by doctors and scientists and historians. Number five, we have evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I just shared a little bit today with Philippians chapter 2, and the New Testament is an incredible document. If you look at that, the way cops look at a crime scene, you will see strong evidence that Jesus came back from the dead. Not just he's a historical figure, he historically rose from the dead. There's a necessity of morality. If there is no God, we're just a bunch of smart, bald chimps. There is no right and wrong. Chimps are brutal. Nature is brutal. Why is slavery wrong? If there is no God, slavery is natural. Ants enslave other ants. They're called slaver ants. Genocide is natural. Racism is natural. Rape is natural. Theft is natural. We cannot survive in a society without morality. It breaks down. So we have this necessity of morality. And when we see evil, we're offended by it. Why? Because you're in the image of God. There's a necessity for morality, right? Well, Hiro Onoda, he was presented with the evidence the same as many other soldiers, and he kept saying, no, I don't believe it. Him and his two friends that are left, they kept fighting. 5 years later, not 5 years later, sorry, let me get my notes caught up here. Right here we go. 9 years later, so 4 years after the last soldier surrendered, 9 years later, 1954, his second friend is shot and killed. Again, they're engaging in guerrilla warfare, and people don't like being shot at themselves, they're going to shoot back. The second friend is shot and killed 27 years after landing on that island. Hiro Onoda is left there with one other friend. 27 years later, his last friend is shot and killed. Now, he's by himself. If you've ever had something challenging, right? Or maybe going on a ski trip or a road trip or something, going by yourself is totally different. Whether you have one friend, two friends, or three friends, it's a little different having multiple friends, but going from having one other person with you to literally being alone is huge for a human. We are social creatures. He's now by himself in the jungles, and he stays there, living off the land and fighting the enemy, or who he perceives is the enemy. He's there for another 2 years, 29 years after going into the jungle of Luban Island on February 20. There's a young hippie named Noria Suzuki. He's traveling around the world, literally in search of Lieutenant Onoda, in search of a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. And they know where Hiro is staying, right? Because that's the area people get shot at. So they know he's in this jungle over here. Nobody can catch him for 29 years. They've tried multiple times to flush him out. So now this young Japanese hippie starts walking into this jungle, knowing there's a trained killer in there that nobody can catch, right? The best soldiers can't find this guy, and he's walking into the jungle alone and unarmed. And as he's walking in, he knows that Hiro's gun is trained on him. Has to be. And he walks in and he sits down in a clearing and he waits. Now Hiro, from his perch, has been watching this guy come in. And he can tell, this guy's a Filipino, man. This guy's Japanese. What's a Japanese guy doing here? And he's watching him come in, and he's wearing modern clothes. You can see in the picture, Western clothes. He's watching him come in, and he observes, he kind of sits down and waits. And so Hironoda slowly comes out of the jungle with his gun in his hand, cautious, make sure it's not a trap. Can't trust the Americans, comes out, and he finally goes up and he meets Suzuki. And the two of them greet each other, right? And Suzuki explains to him, listen, man, this is great what you've done. You've been here for 29 years. You are a national hero in Japan. You are famous. Everybody respects your dedication to never surrender and stay loyal to your commanding officer. But listen, man, the war is over. The war was over in 1945. Your family is waiting for you back home. Come back home to Japan. Well, finally, with the eyewitness account of Suzuki, Hiro Onoda finally believes the good news. But his loyalty is so strong to his commanding officer that he still refuses to surrender. He says, I will only surrender to one of my commanding officers. So Suzuki flies back home to Japan, finds his commanding officer, of course, is retired from the army. He's now a bookseller. Okay, he's working over at Chapters. Now, Suzuki and his commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, sorry if you're Japanese, I know I'm not getting these right, but I'm trying, fly back to the Philippines. Now, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi meets with Hiro Onoda. They meet as soldiers with mutual respect. He commands him to step down. And now, finally, after 29 years in the jungle, on March 9, 1974, Hiro Onoda is the last World War II soldier to surrender. He then goes and meets with his former enemy, a soldier who waged guerrilla warfare against the Japanese, is now president of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos. Well, they meet together in the palace on the day of his surrender in 1974. They shake hands. President Ferdinand Marcos gives him a full pardon. In a show of respect, Hiro Onoda takes his ceremonial sword and passes it to President Marcos. President Marcos accepts the gift. There was a sign of mutual respect between soldiers, gives him the sword back. They are now not only at peace, but in a state of mutual respect and friendship. Well, Hiro Onoda flies back to Japan and gets a hero's welcome, right? There are roaring crowds, celebratory parades, and speech by public officials. His entire nation is stirred with pride, And a little bit later, he writes his autobiography, No Surrender, My 30-Year War, right? Detailing the story, how he refused to surrender to anybody but his commanding officer. Who is your commanding officer? Everybody is living for something, right? If you're not living for Christ, what are you living for? Are you living for pleasure? You're living for ease? You're living for success? Because, man, you can have everything and have nothing. But with Jesus, you can have nothing but have everything. Jesus has better things to do than ruin your life, give you a bunch of rules that make no sense and have no purpose. He wants to give you a rich and satisfying life. And this has been verified by science. Jesus wants to be a blessing to you so you can be a blessing to others. Would you trust him to be your king? Soldiers, we celebrate today how soldiers died to give you political freedom. Well, Jesus died and rose from the dead to give you spiritual freedom. Well, Hiro Noda, in 1996, 51 years after he determined to never surrender, he went back to the very island that he fought on for 29 years, to the site of his long holdout, and he gave $10,000 in 1996. Money is like $30,000 today. He gave $10,000 to a school there. Then about 20 years later, 15 years later, in 2011, he came back to Lubin Island, greeted by the local children. Welcome back as a hero. Look at the flowers they presented him with in celebration of his second return in 2011. And he gave more money to set up a school project on the island. He really was at peace now. I want to ask you, is it worth the fight? Is it worth the fight? How often Christ has longed to gather you under his wings, but were you willing? Is God's authority deserved? Can you trust his authority in your life? And number 3, is it worth resisting Christ? Just wanting to do things the way you want to do them. Living your truth instead of living for God, the source of truth.